The 6 weeks that broke France, 1940. In the spring of 1940, the most powerful army in the world was not German. It was French. On paper, the French army was considered the best in Europe, backed by the British Expeditionary Force, the Dutch, and the Belgians. Together, the Allies had more tanks than Hitler, more guns than Hitler, and nearly as many planes as Hitler. And yet, in just 46 days, this so-called strongest army on Earth collapsed so completely that German soldiers doing the invading could not believe what was happening in front of their own eyes. Generals wept. Prime ministers resigned overnight. A country of 40 million people surrendered before most of its own citizens even understood they were at war. So here is the question that has haunted historians for over 80 years. How does the strongest army in the world lose in 6 weeks? Stay until the end, because the final answer is going to completely change how you see the entire Second World War. Let's rewind to September 1939. Germany has just crushed Poland in under a month. Britain and France declare war but do almost nothing, just waiting. Behind closed doors in Berlin, Hitler is already impatient. His alliance with Stalin feels temporary, a ticking clock, and he wants to strike west before that clock runs out. On September 27th, barely weeks after Poland falls, Hitler stuns his own generals by demanding an attack on France within a month. His generals are horrified. This is not Poland, they warn him. If the Germans attack, everyone already knows it has to come through Belgium, the only realistic route around France's massive fortified border, the Maginot Line. The French know this. The British know this. An attack through Belgium will be bloody, brutal, exactly the kind of grinding slaughter that defined the First World War just 20 years earlier. Hitler does not care. He orders the planning to begin anyway. What follows is one of the strangest planning periods in military history, and almost nobody talks about it. The original German plan is embarrassingly predictable, basically a copy of the old Schlieffen Plan from World War I, a big sweeping attack through central Belgium. Hitler hates it, knowing the French are expecting exactly this. The back and forth between Hitler and his generals drags on for months. The invasion date gets pushed back, not once, not 5 times, but 29 separate times. And then, almost by accident, a completely different idea starts gaining traction. A general named Erich von Manstein proposes something radical. Instead of the obvious attack everyone expects, why not send the tanks through the Ardennes forest, a dense, hilly region that every military planner in Europe considers completely impassable for large tank formations? The German High Command thinks the idea is reckless and shuts it down. But here is the twist that decides the fate of France before a single shot is fired. In January 1940, a German plane carrying a copy of the original attack plan crashes in Belgium. The plan is compromised. Forced to improvise, the Germans create an entirely new plan, and this time Manstein's forbidden idea quietly makes its way back onto the table. On February 24, 1940, the final plan is approved. One army group will make a loud, visible push into the Netherlands and Belgium, just enough to convince the Allies this is the real attack. Meanwhile, the true strike force, Germany's precious tank divisions, will thread the needle through the supposedly impassable Ardennes, cross the river Meuse at Sedan, and race like a spear straight for the coast, trapping the best Allied armies before they even realize what has happened. Germany's own commanders think this plan is insanely risky. One general flatly warns the High Command that they are cramming their tanks into narrow forest roads as if enemy air power does not exist. Meanwhile, the French and British are supremely confident in the Maginot Line. They design Plan D. The moment Germany invades Belgium, the best French divisions and the entire British Expeditionary Force will rush forward to meet them along rivers and canals. It sounds smart. But it has one catastrophic flaw hiding in plain sight, a flaw French intelligence itself warns about and is ignored. The hinge connecting the northern advance and the southern Maginot defenses is the Ardennes forest, the exact region the Germans are about to send their tanks through. Because the French consider it impassable, they leave it thinly defended. French intelligence reports flag suspicious activity there. The High Command does nothing. There is also no strategic reserve, because France's best mobile army has already been committed to rushing into the Netherlands, a move that looks good politically but makes little military sense. And on the eve of battle, the numbers actually favor the Allies. 3.7 million men, 14,000 guns, 3,000 planes, 3,700 tanks, against Germany's 2.8 million men, 7,500 guns, 4,000 planes, and 2,700 tanks. Only 16 of Germany's 157 divisions are even motorized. If this was simple math, France wins easily. So what happens next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about how wars are actually won. May 10, 1940. Before dawn, German forces pour across the borders of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg all at once, designed to look exactly like the plan the Allies expect. German soldiers even dress in Dutch uniforms to seize bridges by surprise. Paratroopers drop onto Dutch airfields, though many fail thanks to fierce Dutch resistance. On May 14th, German bombers flatten the port city of Rotterdam, killing 800 civilians purely to terrify the Dutch into surrendering. Panicked officials believe 30,000 have died. The Dutch government flees, and the army surrenders the next day. The Netherlands is gone, just 5 days in. Belgium falls back just as quickly, though a handful of Belgian units accidentally hold up German tanks for hours simply because nobody told them to stop fighting. Franco-British troops finally move into Belgium as planned, but their advance is painfully slow, choked by roads jammed with terrified refugees. They are walking directly into a trap, and they do not know it yet. Now here is the moment that actually changes everything. The 72 hours history books tend to rush past. In the dense Ardennes forest, German tank columns begin advancing, and at first things do not go smoothly. Blown bridges and roadblocks slow them to a crawl. Massive traffic jams stretch back an astonishing 250 kilometers, bumper to bumper, completely exposed. This is the moment. If French bombers had hit that traffic jam with everything they had, the entire gamble could have been strangled in its crib. It does not happen. Local commanders had requested reinforcements days earlier. Nobody sent them. French Commander-in-Chief Maurice Gamelin calculates that the slow German artillery will take 9 full days to reach the Meuse. He is catastrophically wrong. Failing to grasp this is not a plodding old-style advance, but a new kind of warfare built on speed, and commanders willing to disobey orders and push forward without waiting for permission. On May 12th, French units facing German commander Heinz Guderian simply withdraw without even fighting. Many German tanks are actually weaker, obsolete models, but they arrive in overwhelming numbers with total surprise, enough to break French nerve before a shot is fired. A French officer notes that captured prisoners, asked why they are even fighting, bitterly reply that England and the rich want this war, not them, their eyes glowing with hate when they mention England. The French, he says, have never been this demoralized before. On May 13th, German infantry and cavalry crossed the Meuse at Sedan, the single most decisive crossing of the entire campaign. One captured French general admits to his captors with stunned disbelief, quote, "You are much too fast for us, it's everything." Wild rumors spread through French ranks that Germans are already behind them, and panic alone causes entire units to break and flee. Overhead, the Luftwaffe relentlessly pounds Allied columns before German ground troops even arrive. By May 14th, German tanks have crossed the Meuse, though badly bruised, some units down to a quarter strength, dangerously low on fuel and ammunition. This is the second golden opportunity. If the French mount a serious counterattack right now against these exhausted bridgeheads, they can still collapse the entire German offensive. If they fail, half the Allied army will be cut off permanently. While soldiers bleed along the Meuse, the political earthquake ripples through London and Paris. On May 10th, Neville Chamberlain resigns, replaced by a defiant Winston Churchill, a man who will refuse to even consider surrender. French Premier Paul Reynaud recalls General Maxime Weygand from Syria to take command while appointing aging hero Philippe Pétain as deputy premier, a man who already privately believes the war is lost. Reynaud begs Britain for 10 fighter squadrons. Churchill wants to send them. His cabinet, terrified about home defense, agrees to send only 4. On the 15th, German armor breaks out and advances 65 kilometers in a single evening. Gamelin finally orders retreat from Belgium. For 3 critical days, the Germans pause both army groups to let infantry catch up and protect their exposed flanks. Exactly the vulnerability Manstein's plan had anticipated. Once again, the Allies do not seize the opening. One French general confesses he has no idea what to do against the panzers. A British general mutters, "My God, how awful to be allied to so temperamental a race." But do not think the French simply rolled over. Near the village of Stone, French Captain Pierre Billotte single-handedly destroys 11 German tanks in one afternoon, one of the most remarkable single-tank actions of the war. Proof the problem was never courage. The problem, again and again, was coordination, speed, and leadership at the top. Despite heroics like his, on May 20th, German tanks reached the English Channel at Abbeville, slicing the entire Allied army in two. Over 1 million British and French soldiers are now trapped in a shrinking pocket, cut off from supply and any hope of coordinated withdrawal. A German officer describes the wreckage in almost poetic horror. Streets lined with shot-up vehicles, burnt-out tanks, an endless, never-ending chain of destruction. Now the story takes its most famous, most misunderstood turn. The Allies organize a coordinated attack to sever the narrow German corridor. Near Arras, on May 21st and 22nd, British Matilda tanks actually punch through and genuinely terrify German commanders, forcing them to scramble anti-aircraft guns just to hold on. It is close, closer than most people realize. But the attack fails to break through, and Allied forces begin a fighting retreat toward a small fishing port almost nobody has heard of, called Dunkirk. Then, on May 24th, something happens that historians will debate forever. Hitler agrees to halt his tanks just miles from Dunkirk, just miles from potentially destroying the entire trapped British army. For decades, he will claim he generously wanted to spare Britain humiliation for future peace talks. This is a lie. German commanders genuinely worry about French counterattacks on their exposed southern flank, want infantry to catch up, have already lost 600 tanks they cannot easily replace, and mistakenly believe a large-scale British evacuation by sea is basically impossible anyway. It is arrogance and exhaustion, not mercy, that stops the tanks, and that single pause becomes one of the most consequential decisions of the entire war. Because what happens next should not have been possible. Starting May 26th, an operation begins that will be remembered as nothing short of miraculous. The BBC broadcasts an urgent call for any private boat owner in Britain to sail across the channel and help. And people actually answer. Fishing boats, tiny pleasure yachts never designed for war, sail directly into a war zone under constant German air attack to pull soldiers off the beaches. A wounded quartermaster named Frank Harrell later describes being blown clean off his evacuation ship after it is struck, thrashing in freezing water with 30 other men, forced to tread water and simply wait for his chance to try again. The very last men are evacuated on June 4th. In total, roughly 700 British and 160 French vessels rescue 193,000 British and 145,000 French soldiers, an extraordinary achievement. Though 88,000 mostly French soldiers defending the evacuation route are forced to surrender in the final hours. And just when it seems the story cannot get more dramatic, it does. On May 28th, without even consulting the British or French, Belgium's King Leopold unilaterally surrenders and becomes a prisoner of the Germans. The Allies are outraged. Renaud furiously calls him a pig. Some French leaders begin quietly pressuring their own government to pursue a separate peace with Germany entirely. Churchill absolutely refuses, delivering one of the most defiant lines of the war, that even if defeated, Britain will be no worse off than if it simply stopped fighting now. With the British Expeditionary Force gone, and France's best units either evacuated without heavy weapons or captured, the Germans turn south toward what remains of the French army. On June 5th, they launch the next phase. The plan is brutally simple. Break what is left of France before it reorganizes. French commander Weygand calls on his troops to defend to the death, introducing fortified strongpoints nicknamed hedgehogs to let German tanks pass while infantry and artillery hold on. For one brief morning, it actually seems to work. A frustrated German general writes in his diary that what looked like success that morning turned out to be nothing, admitting the French are hard and tough. For one moment, it looks like France might hold. It does not last. On June 6th, German forces break through everywhere. Some French units fight with genuine courage, but elsewhere, entire sections simply disintegrate. A shaken French staff officer describes a stunned and haggard herd, a complete mixture of shattered units, adding that these men are simply disoriented. They no longer even understand what is happening, and the mere sight of a single airplane now fills them with terror. German tanks race deep into the French rear with reckless confidence. By June 11th and 12th, German forces cross the Seine and the Marne. British commanders decide the situation is hopeless and withdraw the remaining 200,000 men of what was meant to be a second British expeditionary force. Weygand privately declares the war lost. Renaud angrily tells him to keep fighting. It no longer matters. On June 14th, German troops march triumphantly into Paris. Verdun, the legendary symbol of French resistance from the First World War, falls just 2 days later, and German forces reach both the Loire and the Swiss border. The French army, for all practical purposes, no longer exists. The political collapse mirrors the military one. On June 10th, sensing easy opportunity, Italy declares war on the crumbling Allies, and Norway surrenders the same day. By the 16th, the overwhelming majority of the French cabinet wants an armistice, and Pétain threatens to resign if Renaud refuses to request one, a fatal blow to the government. Renaud begs President Roosevelt for help and receives only polite sympathy. London, in a stunning gesture, actually proposes a full political union between Britain and France to keep France fighting. Pétain dismisses it as a British plot to seize French colonies, bitterly calling it a marriage to a corpse. Renaud resigns. Pétain becomes premier and immediately requests an armistice, Yet even here, not everyone gives up. The very next day, a relatively obscure French general named Charles de Gaulle delivers a defiant radio broadcast from London urging his countrymen to keep fighting from abroad. Almost nobody hears it that day. That is very much about to change. While armistice talks are underway, Mussolini, greedy for his own slice of glory, launches 22 Italian divisions into the French Alps on June 21st. In one final darkly comic footnote, just 6 French divisions stop them cold. Finally, on June 25, 1940, the armistice takes effect. The Battle of France has lasted exactly 46 days. The human cost is almost impossible to comprehend. 59,000 French soldiers killed, 45,000 Germans, 12,500 British, thousands more Dutch, Belgian, and Italian dead. Nearly 30,000 civilians killed, 8 million people become refugees, and over 2 million French and Belgian soldiers are taken prisoner. Germany loses 1,800 aircraft and 839 tanks. The Allies over 3,200 aircraft and 3,300 tanks. And almost immediately, before the guns even stop, a bitter debate erupts over why this happened so fast. Gamelin blames the cowardice of his own soldiers. De Gaulle argues the army was fundamentally misused with outdated thinking. Pétain blames the moral weakness of the French nation itself, a convenient narrative he will later use to justify his own collaborationist government. But French officer and historian Marc Bloch offers what is probably the most honest verdict of all, placing the blame squarely on the incompetence of the high command. Step back, and the real answer becomes painfully obvious. The Allies did not lose because they had fewer tanks. They actually had more. They did not lose because their soldiers lacked courage. Men like Captain Bilot prove that beyond doubt. They lost because they could not react fast enough to the speed and concentrated power of German armor, underestimated tactical air power working with tanks, failed to coordinate their own counterattacks to exploit Germany's very real mistakes, and suffered from constant infighting and collapsing morale at the worst possible moments. This lightning victory sends shockwaves through every government on Earth, including the neutral United States. Inside Germany, it is celebrated as a triumphant Blitzkrieg led by tanks, an image that persists to this day, even though ordinary marching infantry actually did most of the fighting. German leadership, riding this high, now dangerously overestimates its own strength, and with Hitler's prestige at its peak, almost nobody dares question him again, a shift that will plant the seeds for far bigger German mistakes still to come. France is lost, but here's the part that changes everything. The war is very much not over. Churchill remains stubbornly determined to keep fighting alone. De Gaulle begins quietly organizing what will become the Free French Forces from exile. Germany has already begun planning its next offensive, and the skies over England are about to fill with German aircraft in a battle that will decide the war's entire future course. And here's the part that should genuinely give you chills. Barely 5 years after this stunning 6-week collapse, everything will have completely reversed. American, British, and Free French troops will be crossing into Germany itself, approaching the Rhine, while the Red Army storms toward Berlin from the other direction, ready to bring down the very regime that once conquered France in less time than it takes most people to plan a summer vacation. The same overconfidence born from this improbable victory in 1940 will ultimately lead Germany's leadership directly into its own final, catastrophic downfall. If a country with more tanks, more guns, and nearly as many planes as its enemy can still completely collapse in just 46 days, then the real lesson has almost nothing to do with weapons or numbers at all. It has everything to do with speed, coordination, and the willingness of leaders to actually adapt when reality refuses to match their assumptions. That is the uncomfortable truth behind the 6 weeks that broke France. And it is a lesson that would go on to reshape the rest of the entire Second World War.